So I'm going to return to our map here as I just kind of finish up talking about the Neo-Assyrian and Neo-Babylonian empires and what I think that we should just kind of think about walking away from this chapter. So first of all, let's again look at our map and see who the players are in our discussion here. We have Phoenician cities. Here is such as Tyre. We have Damascus, Aram. We have Israel. We have Samaria, which is an area within the north of Israel. And later we'll talk about Samaritans just a little bit. And then we have these towns such as Gaza. I mean, look, Gaza is discussed even now, right? Gazans still exist, people who live in Gaza, and that is Philistina right here, okay? And this is something important that I kind of didn't get a chance to talk about, and I'll go more over again when I talk about the Hebrews, is that because of the Philistines that are talked about on the coast in this area, and the inner part is Jews or the Israelites, Israel, and that it was a part of Canaanite culture, that these cultures kind of mingle with or emerge from, however you want to look at it, as we try to break it down. This land has been called Canaan, simultaneously Israel, Israel and Judah, which we'll talk more about later when there's two kingdoms split, and Palestine. And so there's Palestine now and Palestinians, and then there's historians who also use the term Palestine, just referring to the history of this region. And that gets to be kind of confusing. These are interchangeable. Now, I'll talk about the Palestine issue in the next lecture. So anyways, to move on, just to say about Babylon and Assyria. I was just talking about the reputation that the Assyrians and the Babylonians had, in particular the Assyrians, about their harshness in war. And part of your discussion is going to be, one of your assignments, right, is to go over some of the ideas about ancient warfare that we see in the text, and what we see in the Bible in the book of Numbers, and then we see from the Assyrians. And it's a Holy War in the Ancient World on page 70, and you're going to do a discussion of that. And your opinion will be valid just as long as I remind you not to be sensitive to each other's feelings about it. And I mainly say that because there are Assyrian friends that you may have in the class, as well as Christians or Jewish friends. And if you're attacking Assyrians or Jews or people of the Bible based on what you're reading, try not to personalize it. I mean, you can agree or disagree. You can think about war in whatever context you want as you write and respond to your thoughts on these texts. Just try to make sure that you don't personalize them and attack people. And what I'm also trying to remind you all is not to apologize for the behavior we may see celebrated in ancient texts, but to merely point out that war is always about winning and celebrating victory over your enemies. And this is a hard thing to fathom, especially when now we have the idea of human rights, that there's supposed to be a more humane way of going to war. And it's debatable, as I mentioned, if that's really what's happening. But the idea of a ruler celebrating that he ripped somebody's flesh off and hung it up on a wall is not too common now, even for the most harshest dictators. They may do that in a semi-private setting, but not as much. And when we see like the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, where people are getting their throats cut or beheaded, recorded on TV by certain, terrorist groups, we shudder. This has been kind of a normal way of responding in war that I hate to say. Now, it's interesting, we don't ever watch on our TV anybody getting blown up by U.S. weapons, do we? If we did, would it make you have a different opinion? It made Americans have a different opinion when they watched the war on the Vietnam War on the TV. And that's one of the things that made Americans kind of turn against the war. Some cases, they even turned against the soldiers. Americans, I think, are more likely not to do that again. But I just want you to think about ancient warfare and think about where we're at now and how little you see of the wars that we do now. That it's almost more like in our time to not show what we're doing in war. And back then it was to celebrate how bad you were hurting your enemy, right? And so you see that, and I just want to point out that that's not just an Assyrian thing to do. And this is my opinion, but I feel that Assyrian civilization has had a lot of propaganda. So, well, not propaganda, it's a harsh word. They've been looked upon as being more violent than others, and what I'm just arguing is I'm not sure about that. And maybe you'll agree with me even looking at the comparison in the Holy War text that I'm having you read. And then we also have the other thing that is a common of all empires, is if you notice on 62, Ashurbanipal, who was a warrior Assyrian king, also fancied himself a scholar, as they say. And that, as he conquered this region, he also embraced the legacy of it, and translation of many works in the various languages of the region were kept intact. Now, it gets very confusing sometimes, even for myself, I will admit. When talking about the Babylonian Empire and the Assyrian Empire, we're talking about within Mesopotamia, and don't they seem kind of the same? They almost blend together, and it becomes hard to conceptualize what's different about them, especially because they're really borrowing so much and utilizing so much of the same resources. Maybe a way that we could look at it would be something like, and this may be lacking, but I think it helps. Let's say we went to war with Canada. Okay? How different is the society of Canada from the United States? We speak the same language. Many people claim to be the same religion, have the same kind of governmental system, right? So how different would we look to outsiders hundreds of years from now? What would be unique about it, other than one says that you're Canada and one says that you're United States? I don't know if this is the best illustration, but I hope I think it's somewhat helpful and relevant. And you can look at Europe, World War I and World War II, Germany and Britain going to war. Well, English is a Germanic language. Majority of British claim to be Christian. The majority of Germans claim to be Christian. They both follow the Greco-Roman legacy of Western civilization, and they're bombing the hell out of each other and doing quite mean things. From an outside bird's eye point of view, they may not have looked as different as they saw themselves during that time period. And I think that that's probably what we could say about the competition and the battle between the Neo-Assyrian empires and the Neo-Babylonian, and the way that they fused together, despite the fact that their leaders were obviously seeing themselves as separate. I hope you followed that, okay? So that's mainly what I wanted to kind of say about this part. And, I hope you're keeping up the reading, because my lectures that I'm doing will not at all be as helpful if you haven't read. That's kind of what I'm trying to do, is just kind of complement some of the points of the reading. The last several lectures are going to be about the civilization of the Hebrews. And so that's what I'll be focusing on as we end this chapter, and I think is a very important, one of the most crucial parts of this chapter. And we will return to, as we discuss and go further into Western civilization, we're going to return a lot to the culture of the Hebrews. Regardless of how you view Hebrew civilization, it is you cannot escape its influence on Western civilization. And so I will stop here and we'll move on to that next.